life-changing radio. You reach beyond two worlds. Hello and welcome to Wavescan, the International DX program, researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson and in Los Angeles by Ray Robinson, and produced in the studios of WRMI Shortwave in Okeechobee, Florida. I'm Jeff White. This is edition NWS 861 for release on Sunday, August 24th, 2025. The program today, the transatlantic race to create television. We'll hear from Mike Lamberg, Global Director of Engineering for Transworld Radio. And we'll have a very special DX report from China. We don't often talk about television on Wavescan, but there's a very interesting story of how it was first developed back in the 1920s and 30s, and it does include radio. Various countries lay claim to the invention, but what was the reality? Here's Ray Robinson in Los Angeles, who's been uncovering the truth.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, when I was growing up in England, we were always taught that Scotsman John Logie Baird had been the inventor of television. I was quite surprised when in my 20s at work, I met a Russian co-worker who insisted it had been a Russian. And then when we came to the States in the 1980s, I found that people here thought it was an American, either Charles Francis Jenkins, who I hadn't heard of before, or Philo Farnsworth, who I had. So what was the true story? It turns out it was a mixture of all of them, plus a number of others. In fact, it became something of a race. Let me explain. Number 1519 Connecticut Avenue lies just north of DuPont Circle, about a 20-minute walk from the White House in Washington, D.C. In 1921, the inventor Charles Francis Jenkins set up his laboratory and offices there, upstairs from a car dealership. Today, there are no obvious external indications of this famous resident, nor of his exceptional achievements, awards, and numerous patents. Just over 100 years ago at his laboratory, on June the 13th, 1925, Jenkins gave a demonstration of a televised film sent by radio waves from a building about 4 miles away, in what is now the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory in Bellevue, on the southern outskirts of the District of Columbia. The invited group of mostly government officials included the Secretary of the Navy, Curtis D. Walber. They watched with fascination a film that showed a silhouette of a toy window with its blades in motion. The television picture comprised 48 lines, refreshed at the silent movie rate of 16 frames per second. By July 1925, Jenkins had demonstrated vision and sound transmitted together on a single shortwave radio frequency. The published technical details indicate a high degree of sophistication in his designs, as might be expected from someone with a background in precision phototelegraphy, the transmission of images over wires. In the early 1920s, he developed a practical means of sending images of weather charts by radio to ships at sea. It was this phototelegraphy work that led him into experiments in televising silhouettes of live and filmed scenes. But the Scottish inventor John Logie Baird, who I mentioned earlier, beat him to become the first to perform a public demonstration of a similar mechanical television system in London over 3 weeks in March and April 1925. Baird, who'd been working on the technology since early 1923, showed live moving images in reflected light transmitted by radio to enthusiastic crowds in Selfridge's department store on Oxford Street in London's West End. With only 8 lines per picture, he carefully chose simple objects that would be easily identifiable. For the demonstration, he built a television studio in Covent Garden, less than half a mile away, and experimented with a small transmitter. By January of the following year, 1926, he gained widespread recognition for being able to demonstrate 30-line television, showing recognizable facial features in reflected light. But in order to gain more funding, which would require the sale of television receivers, he soon realized he needed a much more powerful transmitter to broadcast his programs. The BBC had such a transmitter, 2LO, which was conveniently located on the roof of Selfridges. 2LO was used for daily wireless programs, but the BBC service closed down in the evening at about 11 p.m. and often didn't restart until mid-morning. So Baird approached the BBC for permission to use the transmitter during the overnight periods. Eventually, the BBC reluctantly agreed. By the end of 1929, Baird was running a program of regular television broadcasts which would continue for the next 6 years. Unfortunately, at first, the BBC only had the one transmitter, and for television you need two, one for the picture and one for sound. It meant that for the first 6 months, television programs comprised 2 minutes of picture, followed by 2 minutes of sound, and so on. But by March 1930, the BBC had opened a second radio transmitter, and so simultaneous sound and picture transmissions began. In the United States, meanwhile, Jenkins had doubled down on improving the image quality for his demonstration. He launched his silent silhouette video service for hobbyists on radio station W3XK in July 1928, around the same time as similar offerings from companies that included General Electric, GE, and the Radio Corporation of America, RCA. By the end of 1928, there were thought to have been as many as 15 experimental television stations operating in the United States. Like Baird's and Jenkins' methods, many of these early stations relied on mechanically rotating discs with patterns of holes to scan images line by line. They were all very low on detail, but were still heralded as proof of concept for television. A key factor in their acceptance was the uncanny ability of human vision to recognize facial expressions along with natural body motion in poor quality images. Back in the UK in 1928, Baird went on to demonstrate colour television, early 3D stereoscopic television, and transatlantic television, all for the first time, though more as a way of attracting financial backing than presenting prototypes of future offerings. But those mechanical systems were short-lived. Many scientists and engineers felt that mechanical television using spinning discs was not the answer to television. They felt that the answer lay in a form of electronic television, and its champions were Vladimir Zworykin at RCA in the USA, Isaac Schoenberg's team at EMI, Electric and Musical Industries in the UK, and a 14-year-old farm boy from Idaho called Friday Farnsworth. It took Farnsworth 6 years to take his system from first ideas to prototype. But by 1929, he was the first to demonstrate a complete electronic television system with no moving parts. But he was soon overtaken by other inventors and he faded from the scene. RCA and EMI focused their respective resources on developing vastly superior electronic television systems. These scanned and reproduced images using electron beams that are fired inside a cathode ray tube to capture and show the transmitted moving picture on the screens of people's TV sets. Those pictures had around 100 times the information content of the earlier mechanical systems, and they used ideas from scientists such as Boris Rosing in Russia and Alan Archibald Campbell Swanson in the UK. Sadly, Charles Jenkins didn't live to see those new electronic systems. His health began deteriorating in late 1930, and he died in 1934, aged 66, leaving behind a superb legacy of a career in inventions. In the summer of 1934, the British government set up a committee chaired by Lord Selsdon to investigate the possibility of providing a high-definition television service to replace the low-definition 30-line transmissions already taking place. At that time, Baird's improved mechanical television system had had the benefit of nearly 10 years of development since its invention, whilst the EMI electronic system was still in its infancy. The picture quality of the two systems at that time was similar, and so the Selsdon Committee recommended that 2 television systems of high-definition television should be tried at the London station. The London station was to be built and operated by the BBC, and the 2 systems, Baird and EMI, would broadcast on alternate weeks for a trial period of 6 months. The government defined high definition as not having less than 240 lines per picture. Baird set to work to increase his system to meet the 240 line threshold. At EMI, Isaac Schoenberg took the courageous decision to develop an electronic system which had 405 lines. This leap of faith, based on advice from his research team, which was over 60 strong, would have financially ruined the company had it failed. The Baird company set to work to design and build all the equipment for a complete television station, including the transmitters. EMI, on the other hand, felt that they didn't have the expertise in transmitter design, but they knew a man who did, Guglielmo Marconi. So a new company, Marconi EMI, was formed to deliver the entire electronic station. Meanwhile, the BBC, tasked with providing a suitable building, complete with the studios, sound transmitter, mast and aerials, all within 18 months, began a frantic search for a suitable site. Alexandra Palace, a run-down Victorian entertainment complex in North London, was not their first choice. However, it had a couple of significant advantages. One, part of it was available for rent, and two, it was on the top of a hill. The BBC knew that it was vital to get the transmitting areas as high as possible. Calculations showed that to get a reliable range of 25 miles reception with a 34 kilowatt transmitter in what is now VHF band 1, the aerial had to be about 600 feet or 180 meters above sea level. Alexandra Palace was already half that, so the transmitting tower only needed to be another 300 feet, 90 meters tall. The summer of 1936 saw a hive of activity as everyone worked frantically towards the official opening date of early November. But all that was about to change. The 1936 radio show at Olympia in London was scheduled for the end of August. Radio Olympia was an annual exhibition put on by the Radio Manufacturers Association, and a number of the exhibitors were displaying new television sets. Concerned that there would be no programs to display of them at the show, the BBC came under pressure to provide demonstration transmissions during August. A variety show was quickly put together called Here's Looking at You, and it went out twice a day for 2 weeks, with the two competing television systems alternating on a daily basis. BBC Television formally opened a regularly scheduled service on the 2nd of November 1936 at 3 p.m, with speeches by the Postmaster General, the Chairman of the BBC and Lord Selsdon. The opening ceremony actually took place twice. First on the toss of a coin in front of the Baird cameras, and then again with the Marconi EMI system. In this way, BBC Television's second programme was also its first repeat. The first programme, following the official opening on the 2nd of November, was a bulletin of British Movietone news. Other programmes transmitted on that day included variety pieces and the first TV documentary, Television Comes to London. The new BBC television service had started, and it was the first regularly scheduled true high-definition television service in the world. With the two systems alternating on a weekly basis, it was soon clear that Marconi EMI were offering superior performance. The decision was taken to end the competition early, and after only 3 months, the final Baird transmission went out at the end of January 1937. John Logie Baird continued to work as a TV pioneer in the late 1930s and early 1940s, dedicated to exploring colour television and cinema projection. He died in 1946 at the age of just 57. In the USA, by the late 1930s, RCA had developed a 441-line system, which was adopted by their NBC TV network. But then, in 1941, under pressure from competing technologies, the FCC-funded committee called the NTSC, which decided to standardize on a 525-line system. That, of course, was black and white. But a compatible standard for colour television was adopted in 1953. And the first programme broadcast coast-to-coast in colour was the January 1st, 1954 coverage on NBC of the Rose Parade from Pasadena, California. After a short break during World War II, the British 405-line television service continued for several decades. It was supplemented in 1955 by the introduction of a commercial TV service, independent television or ITV, in VHF band 3. And that 405-line black and white system is what I grew up with in England during the 1950s and 60s. Alongside the 405 line system, the superior quality 625 line system was introduced on UHF in 1964. And then colour television using the compatible PAL standard was gradually introduced program by program from 1967 onwards. The 405 line black and white VHF service was finally shut down at the start of 1985, more than 48 years after it had officially been launched. Jenkins and Baird's original pioneering efforts and the excitement they generated are still brightly heralded by many people today. We can now only imagine how it must have felt to see moving images transmitted from miles away for the first time. It's incredible to reflect that what was once considered magic so quickly became mundane. Back to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Ray. Next week we'll be featuring the South American country of Brazil and taking a look at the shortwave scene there. At the recent annual meeting of the U.S. National Association of Shortwave Broadcasters in North Carolina, held at Transworld Radio, we heard from several officials of TWR, including Mike Lamberg, Global Director of Engineering.
Yeah, I've been in this role for less than 6 months. Before that, I was at both the sites about 2.5 years. I was a chief engineer on Guam. Before then, I was the chief engineer at SOT. So I'm sad by the announcement of KTWR, although I understand the decision. When you put that blood, sweat, and tears into a place, and I was there for Typhoon Alarm, so I got baptized by fire, getting through that, getting it back up in the air. But you see these messages from people, far-flung areas whose lives were touched because they turned on a radio. And as an engineer, it always humbles me that a group of nerds, tech guys, thousands of miles away, made that experience happen. And so I thank you for all of you guys for all the work that you do to keep shortwave going, because even though it's old technology, it is such vital technology in a lot of parts of the world. So KTWR, that music sound, that's what TV, that is a lot more exciting. The fact that we'll be able to increase our outreach from there. As you know, sure, Africa is hard to reach in other ways. I lived there for 4.5 years. You can buy data prepaid by the kilobyte. So, reaching people through the internet, not really too good. And a lot of people, they don't have electricity or rental water, let alone Wi-Fi. So the fact that we'll be able to reinvest in that site and increase the capacity, increase the ministry, it's an exciting time. And then, as far as Asia goes, I just want to reiterate that if we're not ending our ministry there, we're just ending the broadcast from that one site. And so the partnerships with other broadcasters, other outlets, so crucial for us being able to continue that ministry going forward.
That was Mike Lamberg, Global Director of Engineering at Transworld Radio, speaking at the NASB meeting in Cary, North Carolina in mid-June. We'll have much more from TWR in coming programs. Finally, today we have a very special DX report from China, from our regular South African DX reporter, Andre Hoos. He recently had the opportunity to visit Guangzhou, China, and here's what he found.
Have you ever wondered what shortwave radio sounds like from inside China? DXers around the world often hear the booming signals of China Radio International, China National Radio 1, China National Radio 2, and various other Chinese stations. And of course, we also hear the jamming against broadcasts from Radio Taiwan International or Sound of Hope. But what does that sound like on the inside? I had the chance to find out on a short visit to China in July. This is Andreas in Johannesburg, South Africa, with a report of my recent visit to China and my DXing experiences there. I was in Guangzhou, southern China, in a hotel room overlooking the Pearl River, right above the historic Shamian Island. Shamian was once the site of an old international settlement during the 20th century. Back in the 18th and 19th century, Guangzhou was known as Canton, and there was a system called the Canton system, which regulated trade with China from foreign countries. Canton back then was the only port where foreigners were allowed to trade. It was the only Chinese city that was open to Western trade. All of Shamian Island is now a historic site, and the international settlement buildings in French and British architectural styles are all still there. It is an interesting experience to walk around on Shamian Island. In a sense, one feels transported to old Europe, but the Chinese signage and the local tourists make it clear that you are, in fact, in China. Right there, in the middle of this historic reminder of global communication and trade, I set up my radio by the hotel window overlooking the Pearl River down below to scan the shortwave bands. I used just the whip antenna and switched off all the lights in my room to reduce RFI. I scanned the shortwave bands at 22:35 China Standard Time, which is 14:35 UTC. It is interesting to note that China has only one time zone, despite being such a big country that in actual fact it covers at least 3 time zones. But the entire country is on Beijing time. So what did I actually hear inside China's border? The first thing that hits you is the signal strength of Chinese shortwave stations. CNR1, CNR2, various CRI broadcasts, and many provincial people's broadcasting stations, PBS, absolutely flood the bands, often in almost FM-like barriers. CNR1 pops up all over the dial, sometimes with slightly different timing or audio delay, as this signal comes from multiple locations all around China. Most of these stations had an SIO rating of 555. It is clear that some foreign signals are being jammed. CNR1 is transmitted on the same frequencies of Radio Taiwan International and Sound Above broadcasts, often successfully overriding these stations, but not always. Radio Taiwan International on 6075, 6145 and 9660 kHz was heavily jammed, sometimes by even 2 different CNR1 signals at once. Sometimes it was still listenable, but mostly it was completely drowned out. Both signals were strong, the CNR1 jammer and the RTI signal, but I think it will be very hard to make out anything from either of these 2 stations. Sound of Hope, a religious broadcaster that China actively tries to block, was heard multiple times during my scan, despite some serious jamming efforts. On some frequencies, the jamming hadn't caught up. These included 9280, 9300, and 11500 kHz. On these frequencies, I could hear Sound of Hope clearly. Adventist World Radio in Chinese on 15710 kHz was loud and clear, and it was not being jammed at all. The signal from KNOS Alaska on 9580 kHz came in clearly. As with FEBC Manila in Chinese on 15515 kHz.
为什么在这里他又在重复的、丰富的？因为王灾它不是个别的。
And in Uyghur, the language that seems to be somewhat sensitive inside China, yet the Uyghur broadcast on 15540 kHz was not jammed. Also NHK in Chinese on 9560 kHz and through with an SIO of 555. On 10,000 kHz I could hear two time signals, both BPM from China and WWBH from Hawaii. Stations like Furusato no Kaze on 9685 kHz, targeting North Korea, Voice of Mongolia on 12015 kHz, and Radio Farda on 12035 kHz from Otabaya, all reached my little radio with just the whip antenna in the hotel room. And of course, there were dozens of CNR, CRI, and PBS provincial stations that seemed to fill in every gap. CNR 5 Plus Straight Radio on 5925 and 7385 kHz, and CNR 6 Xinzhou Easy Radio on 6165 and 11775 kHz, both targeting Taiwan, was strong. CNR 7 Great Bay Radio was also strong. Guangzhou is in the Great Bay area, which includes Hong Kong and Shenzhen as well. The Great Bay area is the largest urban conglomeration in the world, with a population of more than 70 million people. DXing inside China was indeed a fascinating experience. There were so many signals, and I had many Chinese signals that I had never heard before, like Voice of Jinling on 6200 kHz from Nanjing, which is west of Shanghai, far to the north of Guangzhou. And I also heard PBS Guizhou on 9740 kHz. I am sure there are many more, and whoever gets the opportunity to travel to China will certainly have a very, very interesting DXing experience.
Thank you very much, Andre Host, our South African DX reporter, temporarily in China. And we had Wavescan today with Chinese traditional music. Thanks for listening to Wavescan, the international DX program, researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson, and in Los Angeles by Ray Robinson. Next week, Brazil on shortwave. More talks from the NASB meeting at Transworld Radio. Wavescan is heard weekly in the Americas from WRMI in Florida and WWCR in Tennessee. Across Asia, Australia, and New Zealand on Reach Beyond Australia, on Voice of Hope Africa from Zambia, and in Europe on IRRS Italy. Please send reception reports directly to any of those stations. Podcasts of this program are available through wavescan.automatic. That's PODOMATIC.com. Your comments or suggestions are always welcome. Just email Ray or me using the address wavescan@yahoo.com. I'm Jeff White at WRMI Shortwave in Okeechobee, Florida. Till next week, good listening, everyone.
Thank you for tuning to Reach Beyond Australia. Join us again tomorrow evening at 1400 UTC or 7:30 PM India Standard Time on this same frequency of 11870 kHz in the 25-meter band.